Welcome back to the VPartySports podcast. VPArty here with you on this Saturday morning, a little bit after 9 a.m. on the East Coast and 6 a.m. on the West Coast. We just did an NFL preview for Saturday's games. Check out any of the previous podcasts. Darren Smith of the Kansas City Chiefs, covers the Kansas City Chiefs for ESPN Radio in Kansas City. We had an interview with him previewing the game between Jacksonville and KC. Jacksonville, KC. The lines for that game, Kansas City 9.5 and 53.5. The Philadelphia Eagles are 7.5 and 48 versus the New York Giants. All right, those are the two games for Saturday. Let's get to the NBA here real quick. 5-0, as I told you, on Friday for me. Best bets coming up at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. on the Pacific with the Daily Post. Yesterday in the NBA, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Let's run them down a little bit. Magic come back on the Pelicans, 123-110. The Hawks beat the Knicks 139-124. Second game, they've scored 130. Warriors rest players after their crushing loss versus Boston Thursday. They beat Cleveland 120-114. The Mavs upend the Heat 115-90. That was an underdog play. Denver's won 9 straight. They cover easily against Indiana 134-111. The Nets beat the Jazz 117-106 as an underdog. First win for the Nets, by the way, without KD. And LA beats Memphis on a Schroeder game-winning bucket after Memphis turned the ball over late in that game. LA, a 7-point underdog, came back to cover. And the best bet of the day, the Oklahoma City Thunder are now 24-10 as an underdog. They come back. Yes, they get a little lucky. If you don't think there's luck involved in sports wagering, there is a little luck. Down 6, Isaiah Joe hits a three-pointer with 1.4 seconds left. And then De'Aaron Fox gets a basket, but it's not a cover. It's a 2-point basket with 1.2 seconds left. Game over, 5-point victory for the Kings. Winner, winner, chicken dinner on the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are now 24-10 as an underdog this year in the NBA, the best record of number of 10 games minimum in that scenario. So 7 games Saturday. Favorites were 2-7. The overs and unders of the 9 games yesterday, 4 overs and 5 unders, and a lot of that is based on the fact that the NBA, their totals are being set very high by the bookmakers. They're in the 240s, a lot of these cases. So a lot of times they're not going to be able to get to that 240. All right, in hockey, a couple of games in hockey. Pittsburgh beat Ottawa 4-1, as did Colorado, but the same 4-1. Both were favorites in the NHL. The road teams, let's see here, 4-1. Is 5. So the home teams covered. It was a push, actually. The away teams were favored 125 yesterday, but the total ended up at 5-5. So even Steven there. And then the Grand Salami was 13.5, and that stayed under as the total for both games ended up at 10. All right. We have the college basketball to get to here real quick. Let's go to the ACC. As we have the NFL ticker and the NBA ticker going across the bottom here. Let's hit the ACC first. Bunch of games in the ACC. Duke and Miami. Duke a 5.5-point favorite. Syracuse at Georgia Tech. Notre Dame versus Boston College. Virginia at Wake Forest. Pittsburgh, a very hot Pittsburgh team right now, playing a very cold Florida State team. North Carolina State. That's a big rivalry, as you know. 5.5 for the Tar Heels there, who haven't played all that great this year, but 153.5. The total. Traditionally, that game has gone over in the past. Both teams can score. North Carolina a little down this year in terms of scoring. Clemson, 1.5-point favorite versus Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech, who lost to Virginia in their interstate rivalry during the week as well. Big Ten, Ohio State, 3.5 versus Iowa. Penn State, 8.5 versus Nebraska. Ohio State slumping right now. Iowa last Sunday got a win over Maryland. They won by 13. And Northwestern and Wisconsin postponed. An outbreak of COVID on the Northwestern campus amongst the basketball team has postponed their last 2 games. Big 12, Kansas, the big one today in Lawrence, Kansas, a 7-point favorite versus TCU, 145.5 the total. Kansas State, Texas Tech, Kansas State a 5-point favorite. Oklahoma State a pick versus Iowa State. Iowa State has played really well in their last 2 weeks. They've come away with 4 wins out of 5 games. Baylor 2.5 at Oklahoma. Oklahoma, tough loss at Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State, top 10 team in defense in the NCAA. this year, according to Ken Palm. And West Virginia, 1-point favorite over a somewhat struggling Texas Longhorns program, 145 the total. Big East, Xavier, a 17-point favorite versus Georgetown. Georgetown covered against Villanova on Monday. That was a 14.5-point spread on the road. They've got players, and they can play on this team, and they can cover, but they haven't won a conference game in nearly 18 months. Actually, let's see, 14 months they haven't had a non-conference win at Georgetown. Patrick Ewing and the rest of the Hoyas feeling the pressure. 157.5 the total. They give up a lot of points. They score a lot of points. 17 even maybe too much for Xavier today. Georgetown, 157.5. The game in Cincinnati at Xavier at Cintas Center. Providence got a big win. Providence got a big win during the week over Marquette. 9.5 is their favorite over DePaul. 146.5. Marquette, 1.5-point favorite at Seton Hall. 143.5. That's your Big East standings. In the MAC, Ohio 11 versus Central Michigan. Akron 7 at Western Michigan. Eastern Michigan 3 versus Northern Illinois. Bowling Green 3 versus Miami of Ohio. Missouri Valley Conference has a number of games today. Northern Iowa 4.5 versus University of Illinois Chicago, 138 the total. Missouri State, who's played well this year, 122.5 the total versus Southern Illinois. Very low scoring game. Anticipate that to be in the 50s. Bradley 7 versus Belmont. Those of you who followed my daily posts and best bets know that Belmont has been one of the top teams to cover. Bradley has played well, but Belmont, a 7-point underdog, might be the play here. 136.5. And then Drake 14 over Evansville, 135. Indiana State, who leads the conference right now, right up there at the top of the conference in the Missouri Valley, 3 over Murray State, 147 the total. And Illinois State is 7 versus Valparaiso, 133.5. We'll break them down a little bit further. Mountain West, Colorado State at Wyoming. Colorado State a 1-point favorite at Wyoming, 143.5. Utah State 11.5 versus my Spartans. Spartans have been struggling the last week. They've been covering, so 11.5 maybe a lot for Utah State. But Utah State, Boise State, and Nevada Reno, the top of the class right now in the Mountain West, 140 the total. UNLV 3.5 at Fresno State. UNLV only 1 win in conference play, make it 2 wins in conference play, 130 the total. And San Diego State got beat up by New Mexico at home last week as a favorite. Air Force, they're visiting the Air Force Academy, 131.5. The SEC, we'll hit the Pac-12 in a second. There's a monster game in the Pac-12 that I want to delve into a little bit. Arkansas, 9.5 over Mississippi. Georgia has been playing very well. You wouldn't think of Georgia as a basketball school based on what they've done for football, but they're 3-point favorite versus Vanderbilt. Kentucky, coming off their win last weekend over Tennessee, 5.5 versus Texas A&M. Texas A&M gave up a 3 at the buzzer, did not cover the 3.5 versus Florida, 135.5, but they played very well. Auburn, 12.5 at South Carolina. Tennessee, 11 at LSU. They got a big win at Mississippi State during the week. I think that was Tuesday. The Tennessee ended up running away with that game and covering the -5.5 or 6 versus Mississippi State. LSU was started off great, and now they've gone in the tank. They lost to Alabama last weekend by 40. So they're an 11-point underdog at home. You know, I feel about heavy favorites on the road, 131 the total here. And this is a different day and age in college basketball. Alabama, 5.5 at Missouri, 162. And Mississippi State, 2-point favorite versus Florida, 129 the total. West Coast Conference, Portland, -4 versus Pepperdine, 161. USF, -1 versus BYU. St. Mary's, 12 versus a very good Santa Clara team. They beat up on Portland Thursday night, did St. Mary's. And Gonzaga, the upset loss on Thursday night to Loyola Marymount. I'm going to feel bad for UOP today. 16.5 at UOP, 158.5 the total in that game in the WCC. Finally, the Pac-12, Utah 7.5 versus Washington, 139.5. Utah win over Washington State Thursday night. Arizona State had a lead on UCLA. We'll get to UCLA in a second. They're -4 versus USC, who got blown out by Arizona Thursday night. Both teams lose. Both teams playing well in conference play. Be a good matchup. And Oregon, a 3-point favorite at Stanford. Stanford coming off their win, big win over Oregon State Thursday night. Oregon on Thursday. What did Oregon do on Thursday? Oregon on Thursday, I want to say they won. Let's see here. January 19th. Oregon played on Wednesday, and they played at Cal. So they've had 4 days off. They beat Cal by 29 points. So in the big game today, 2 o'clock Eastern, 11 o'clock on the West Coast, 12 o'clock down there in Tucson, a place that I spent some time at. The Arizona Wildcats are going to play the UCLA Bruins. Arizona, number 11, coming in. UCLA with that big comeback win against Arizona State, 44-27. They outscored the Sun Devils in the second half. They're going to take on each other standings-wise right now. Both teams, UCLA leads the conference at 8-0, and Arizona State 6-2, Utah 6-3, Oregon 5-3, and then Arizona at number 11 at 5-3. They've had a couple of losses this year. They lost to Washington and Washington State. Washington nearly got to them. Washington State got to them, and then Oregon got to them as well too. Let me make sure on this here. They barely beat Washington. They lost to Washington State. They beat Oregon State, and they lost to Oregon. And then they beat up on USC. So they're 3-2 in their last 5. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this scenario works out. UCLA, great defense. Arizona, terrific offense. They like to run. Tommy Lloyd has got them playing. UCLA would like to slog it out a little bit. They like to stay in the 60s. That's what they did in the last 10 minutes versus Arizona State on Thursday night. So that's your college basketball for Saturday. Again, don't forget best bets rolling up at 11 o'clock Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific with the Daily Post. 5-0 in the NBA on Friday for me and only 1 loss in the NHL. Of course, 2 NFL games today to go with the 14 NHL games that are going to take place. All right, that's going to do it for me. I'm VPArty. Enjoy your Saturday. NFL football, NCAA basketball, NBA basketball, and NHL hockey all come your way all day today from noon Eastern until midnight and beyond on Saturday night. Don't forget to join me tomorrow, Sunday, 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific. We'll recap Saturday's NFL. We'll preview the 2 games on Sunday. It'll be the Buffalo Bills and the Cincinnati Bengals early, and then the Dallas Cowboys and the San Francisco Giants in Santa Clara on Sunday night around 6:30. That starts on the East Coast, 3:30 right here in Santa Clara where I'm at. If you're interested in sponsorships, contact me directly. The Daily Post comes your way weekdays at 6 Eastern and then on weekends at 11 a.m. Eastern. I'm VParty. Thanks again for your time. You can reach me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at VPartySports, on YouTube and Facebook at VParty. Have a great day. Good luck with all your games. Don't forget the Daily Post at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. We will see you tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific, for the VPartySports and the continuation of NFL Divisional Weekend. Take care, everybody. Have a great Saturday.